The diary system gave the chance to the chorus to actually record what was happening, how the musical event passed, what the significance was in the 80th year of Hiroshima's events of the atomic bomb, and to make rapprochement with the Japanese by our activities and by recording them in that fashion.
I had no knowledge of Japan at all. I had no knowledge of Japan in the war at all, having grown up with parents who were children during the war. And I love history, and I feel like I knew a lot about the Second World War from my parents, but none of that included Japan. Didn't really know anything about it. Didn't know what the date was. When my mother-in-law said, "Oh, but the bomb was dropped in August, wasn't it? Not in September. It's not going to be on the anniversary. It was in August." I said, "Was it? I didn't know." And that brought me up short about how much I didn't know. And that is what the diary has helped me enormously, because it's focused my attention on what I didn't know.
And so how did the very existence of this diary project change the nature of the trip for me? This is a massive life event for everybody who was involved in it. And so I think that by jogging us into pre-reflecting on what was going to happen, on why we were going, on what was it all about, it forced me to try and get some ideas into my head. That, in particular, led me then to reading a bunch of history books, and and to try and understand the context of the 1930s and the 1940s.
It made me think more deeply and appreciate more fully what I was seeing, stopping to reflect on the fact of the A-Dome, or stopping to reflect on what I had observed in the Peace Museum, which was harrowing. Without that kind of, deadline's the wrong word, but without that kind of expectation I had set for myself, to participate in the diarising, I don't know that I would have felt things quite as much, or described them to myself or to other people in as much detail.
I think the diary project really helped me to think about, to process at the time and afterwards, in anticipation at the time and afterwards, what I was experiencing and feeling and thinking about the whole experience, the whole adventure expedition. I'm not quite sure what to call it, actually. Yeah, very, very much so.
I expected the experience to be quite harrowing, which it turned out to be in many ways because of the history. But with the diary system, I was able to express myself, to investigate my own feelings before I left, during the experience, and after I returned, reflecting on the earlier questions I set myself at the beginning.
It's interesting that you asked me about whether the diary enhanced the trip for me, because recollecting in tranquility, I can see that it's added a huge amount, because not only was I delighting myself in remembering what we did and how good it was, some of it, and how sad some of it was, but it also was almost writing it into the memory more deeply. And I've always been conscious that whenever you go on any trip, you know that excitement at the start, but also I've always had this sad feeling that I know that this will be gone in a flash, and then it's just a memory which fades. And I think that diarising is something I will take up for the last few years I've got left, at least. And when I travel, I will definitely do that, because it's a great way of remembering. And it's not just the photographs, it's the writing things down that recollect how you felt at the time when you saw things, when you went back to the hotel and thought about them, that become really helpful as triggers for memory.
it has been said of me that I'm of an archival turn of mind. I think that posterity, insofar as anybody ever in future is interested in anything in the past, I think it's really important to capture what people go through, not just as world events in history, you know, the sort of formality of all of that, but also what people experience. So diarising helps to produce something of the quality of the experience, of the human experience of it all. It would not be enough to say 100 and something, I don't know what the exact number is, 100 and something people went to Japan and sang the War Requiem and came home again, because we all had different reasons for going. We all knew different people. Some of us had never done it before. Some of us were old hands, and some of us travelled independently. Others went straight home. It was all very different for each of us. And I think that the diarising helps to capture that, the diversity and the range of those experiences.
Doing the diary was very helpful, and one of the things that summed up the whole trip for me was when we went to the music museum in Tokyo, which was before we even got to Hiroshima, and I had no idea that they had what they called an atomic piano. And when I was asked whether I would like to hear the atomic piano, my first reaction was, well, what do they mean by an atomic piano? Because, you know, is it going to explode or something? And I guess it just lost something in its translation. But what they meant was a piano that had survived the bomb in Hiroshima. And I thought, well, yeah, that's what I'm here for. That's great. Completely unexpected. And, you know, we only had 3 or 4 minutes notice to get there to hear the piano being played. And it still has the damage that was made, but they've somehow sort of cobbled it together in order for it to be playable. But the sound it makes was just so emotional, because you just think that people at that time would have heard that sound, that same sound that I can hear today. And it brought it home to me in a, you know, very visceral way.
The thing I saw and heard was something in the Peace Park when I went down into the basement and listened to a recording of the witnesses to the bomb dropping. Some of them were children at the time, and their descriptions. I think that more than anything else was significant for me.
It took me a very long time in thinking through how to describe the impact of this trip. As I was laying out my notes, I was taking some notes during the day. You know, obviously we learn about it in school, but in a very cursory way, I would say. And I just remember, you know, standing in front of the A Dome and having a sudden and fundamentally different understanding of what had actually happened. And, you know, a sense of deep shame, and I think I wrote about this in my notes elsewhere, of being an American, and being an American in a place that America tried to eradicate 80 years ago. And of course, you know, hard not to reflect on the current political situation and the potential for future such catastrophes in the world.
The diarising of the trip definitely made me much more aware of what was happening around me, of experiencing the museum and the Peace Park for what it was and what it revealed, the stories it told, the umpteen stories it told, the heartbreak of the whole experience. And yes, it made it much, much more meaningful. And having people in the country there whose ancestors had gone through that and had experienced it themselves, far less the audience who attended, and the fact that we were there on site where these things actually took place, extremely moving.
Did I observe better because I was diarising? There were moments, just having that in the back of my mind. Um, it did give rise to some reflections on my part. In particular, there's a little clip of film that I took of blue sky panning down to one of the many beautiful rivers flowing through Hiroshima, and the glittering water of that river, and the feeling that 80 years before that date, there were dead people flowing along that river. And I most certainly had a moment at that moment, to put it mildly.
We saw some very difficult things. I guess I suppose in my mind's eye, I thought there might be some resentment of the British, even though this is a long time ago, that there might be some ill feeling, that there would be some people who would maybe look rather unhappy about you. But in fact, that was not the case at all. So that was where the joy came from, that everywhere we went, people were so polite, so charming, so delightful. And this was not something I had expected.
So, what particularly brought alive Hiroshima's history? I mean, I think the astonishing Peace Park, the memorials there. I think I've already recounted elsewhere an experience that I had in the Peace Park one early evening in between rehearsals when I joined a queue of people that had formed entirely spontaneously to position themselves in front of the cenotaph with the view along the ponds towards the flame and towards the A-bomb dome. And everyone was just pausing silently. There were no selfies. there were people just paying their respects. And so I joined the queue, and that was probably the central moment for me.
The concert itself was the highlight. I mean, it's just hard to overstate how significant that performing experience was.
The trip absolutely lived up to expectations in terms of the music. It was poignant in the extreme, and that's what contributes to it being emotionally exhausting.
Music is one of the surest ways to build community with other people that I have ever experienced. And I actually worked in the concert touring business for a while when I was in my 20s. And so I traveled with college groups, that kind of thing. And we traveled with them and they performed in far-flung parts of the world. And it was always so gratifying to see that kind of sense of, I mean, this sounds incredibly sort of pompous, but the sense of common humanity when you join with people in a musical experience, either as a performer or as an audience member. And so I loved that part of it too, to be reminded that that's still possible in this kind of nutty world we live in right now.
I mean, my trip was partly about the music and partly about visiting Japan, and old Japan rather than modern Japan. So it lived up to it surpassed my expectations in exposing me to bits of Japan that I could not have imagined. Yeah, really, really some thrilling experiences.
I think the trip has changed me as a result of what I experienced in both the museum and the Peace Park, that it helped me find my own peace, which I had been so sorely lacking for a number of years before that. I think it's going to rest with me. I think the visiting the whole area was fascinating, and it's something that that everybody should do at some stage in their life, either there or Auschwitz, to see where the world is going wrong. How can we make rapprochement to sort the things which are going on in the world still today, and there seem to be very few answers to them at the moment.
There's no future in war. It's an obvious statement, I know, but we've got to work harder to achieve that perception across humanity's wide waves of different backgrounds, cultures, and beliefs. It's quite a challenge.
The War Requiem itself is, I think it's the finest work of music I think I know. It's very obvious to say that without Gavin, this project would not have happened. That applies to a tremendous number of things that would have never happened had it not been for Gavin. Gavin's a very good friend of mine, and I have been benefited repeatedly from his enthusiasm, his vision, his let's do that, and Hiroshima must be the combination of all of those. But there are many more projects in the pipeline. Watch this space.